In playoff basketball, everybody has a role. The teams that survive are the ones who execute them. You've got your lead ball handlers, your floor spacers, your play finishers, rebounders, rim protectors. But every once in a while, a player comes along who can do it all at once, impacting the game in such a way that it feels like they're single-handedly deciding the outcome. That's what we're seeing from Victor Wembanyama, and there's no better example than his Game 3 performance against the Timberwolves. In today's video brought to you by PrizePicks, we're going to break down what made this game so impressive. Starting with the very first play, the Spurs go to a down screen from Wemby to bring Vassell to the ball. Gobert's forced to stop the drive, so the Wolves switch, to which they connect on a lob. Less than a minute later, Jaden McDaniels pushes the ball and attacks one-on-one in early offense. He does a good job of creating separation, but Wemby's waiting for him at the basket. Then they come back on offense and set up spread pick and roll. Notice how Wemby angles this screen, pushing Randle out. So when Rudy once again picks up the ball, there's no way to stop him from catching another lob. This is what dominating the paint looks like. On defense, San Antonio's entire scheme is about rotating around Wemby. When Randle hands it off to Conley, they're just going to switch. When they try to get the ball to Ant, Vassell's going to do his best job to deny a touch. They want anybody else in the Wolves playing one-on-one, trying to win their individual matchups. And if they do, Wemby's waiting. That's not a hyperbole. He's always there. If Gobert sets a screen, he's way back in deep drop. Jaden has no space to drive, and Rudy's not a threat to roll. If somebody gets beat on a backdoor cut, he's in front of it, covering both the ball and the dunker as he picks up a second block, then a rebound, only to immediately take off in transition, start the break, run coast to coast, and finish through traffic for 2 points plus a foul. Chris Finch and his staff have tried all sorts of adjustments. Going back to game 2, the Spurs implemented hard double teams, sending 2 to the ball anytime Anthony Edwards got a touch. From there, they'd rotate everybody one pass over, make someone else break down the defense, create, and most importantly, hit shots. What they wanted to do was send that double as far out as half court, forcing him to move the ball to the opposite wing. Then whoever caught the ball would have to beat a rotating defense that happened to have Wemby waiting for him in the paint. The Wolves went to a few different offensive setups in hopes of finding a counter. They know 2 are going to go with Ant, so they have Jaden set a ghost screen. Normally, catching the ball with this much space to attack would be an advantage. Not against the Spurs. Because that double was always going to come from the wing, if Ant wanted to force the issue himself, he'd have to attack in the opposite direction. But even if he gets around his defender, he's just running into Wemby anyways. So in game 3, they had to find a way to pull Wemby out of the paint while also avoiding the double. That starts with their spacing. Notice how instead of a normal spread floor, they empty both wings and flatten out the baseline. Now there's nobody to come and double. Then Gobert sets a high ball screen, to which Wemby continues to drop way back. The only way to make them pay is to separate and knock down jumpers. They don't make that easy at the point of attack though. Whoever's guarding the ball is going to apply constant pressure. When a screen comes, they're going to chase over the top, funneling them into Wemby's drop. They know the Wolves won't be able to get to the rim, so they're often forcing tough middies. Usually, these exact same concepts would apply to Rudy Gobert on the other side of the ball. After all, he's a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, and this is perfect isolation defense. Reading every move, sliding his feet, keeping his hands active. Wemby's length and touch break the game. It only took 4 minutes for him to get to 9 points. The Spurs offense was on fire, and that's when the Wolves decided to optimize their offense, taking Gobert off the court so that they could go 5 out. That's a look we've seen a ton throughout the series. The Spurs have taken a simple approach. They're going to keep Wemby on the baseline at all times. That could mean switching matchups so he's guarding whoever's in the corner. They want him behind the play, where he's always in position to roam. Again, they're not really worried about mismatches or getting stops in isolation. Actually, they're inviting the Wolves to play one-on-one, knowing that as long as Wemby's on the baseline, the rim is completely off limits. Minnesota's tried to manipulate this with different floor setups or by incorporating movement, but it's seamless. Wemby's always going to prioritize the basket first. One thing you'll notice though is that his approach is different depending on who's in the corner. When it's a weaker shooter like Jalen Clark, he's comfortable ignoring him and cheating towards the paint early. The Wolves tried to counter by having Clark set a ball screen, but again, Wemby's just going to sit back and drop. You have to make him pay with pull-up jump shooting. This actually brings up another point of emphasis for the Spurs Game 2 strategy. They weren't only doubling Ant, they were doubling Randle's post-ups from the weak side, which often meant he had Wemby crowding his space. Remember, they're not worried about Clark as a shooter, so although Randle makes the right skip pass, there's no advantage created, and you end up getting the exact shot that the defense wants you to take. However, it's not as simple when they put a better shooter like Naz Reid in the corner. Now, instead of rotating early, Wemby's going to come with late help, waiting for Shannon to start his attack before sending it off the glass. He's able to do this because he covers ground like no other athlete we've ever seen. Even from the strong side corner, Bones starts to beat his defender, and if he helps here, that's an easy kick out to a great shooter. But by letting him think he's got a layup, then committing, he covers both. In situations where he was on the weak side, the Wolves were able to generate a clean blow by and he had to help early, that's when you'd see the Spurs peel switch and X out, with Champagnie dropping to the corner while Johnson rotates to that opposite wing. That's what we saw a lot of in Game 3. I actually thought the Wolves did a pretty good job of creating clean driving lanes, but Wemby can help from the corner, knowing that Fox is going to fly out to Reed with a hard closeout and not let him get a great look from 3. Just because Wemby can be there every time though, doesn't mean he's overhelping. There's a difference. And that ability to cover ground allows him to be in 2 places at once, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of going 5 out in the first place. That's why he's always there. Whether it's an early rotation or some late help, if the Wolves attempt a shot within 8 feet of the basket, he's gonna get a contest. It got to a point where Randall decided to try out for the Minnesota Vikings, blocking Wemby out of the paint with one of the best Gortat screens you will ever see. Sometimes you just get a little bit lucky. It'd be a stretch to say that everything came down to luck though, and keep in mind that while changing everything on defense, he was also changing everything on offense. The downside of taking Gobert out of the game is that you now have to commit more help to the paint. When he sets a screen, instead of Rudy back and drop, you have wings switching, help coming from the perimeter, and shooters starting to open up for high quality threes. Or they'll get the switch and have Wemby play from the post. He's too big to leave in single coverage, but a good enough passer to counter help, so they're still getting high quality threes. After 6.5 minutes of play, the score was 11-1. Yes, the Wolves scored 1 point in more than half a quarter, and that's when Wemby took his first break, which instantly opened things up for Minnesota's offense. Ant gets downhill, and not only does he have an easier time getting a clean look, Gobert's able to follow on the glass. Unlike Wemby, Kornet doesn't have that ability to be in 2 spots at once. So if you're able to create that downhill pressure, he has to help, which gets Rudy free for offense at the rim. You'll see plenty of plays where Kornet does a great job of getting in position to deter a shot. It's the second opportunity at a shot that he isn't as effective against. Remember, the Wolves scored 1 point total in 6.5 minutes. Over the next 4, they scored 10 points in the paint alone. Then when Wemby checked back in, it was business as usual. Gobert's on the court, so he doesn't have to rotate from the corner. He's already underneath the basket waiting. The only way to counter this is by hitting shots. As it pertains to Ant in particular, he's gonna have to consistently hit jumpers over the top of the defense. Take the first play of the second quarter. The Spurs decide not to double, so he's able to access the middle of the floor. He can't get to the rim, but can get to a mid-range pull-up. Next time down, they cleared a side for him to post up Fox. Wemby's ready to play a drive. He can access a turnaround jumper, but it doesn't drop. And the reality is that, at best, these are 45, maybe 50% shots. So over the course of an entire game, you have to find something better. The problem is that there is nothing better. The paint is completely shut off. They're running every shooter off the line. It's only when someone like Champagnie makes the mistake of overhelping that they're able to get to corner threes. They have to take advantage. For the most part, the Spurs' rotations were perfect. This time, Wemby starts on the wing instead of in the corner. Still, when Io gets downhill, he's the one helping. Then there's that peel switch into an X out, with Barnes taking McDaniels and Castle flying out to Reed. You've taken away the rim and a spot up 3, and instead turned it into a floater over an 8-foot wingspan. That's kind of the idea. Taking all of the easiest shots in basketball and making them a little bit worse is so valuable over the course of a game. We're talking about 70, 80 possessions with a significantly lower expected value. First, Randall tries to post up, but Wemby's there with a double. Then they rotate out of it to not give up an open 3. The Wolves empty the wing to avoid a double on Ant, and he goes to work one-on-one. The shot he gets? A step back 20-foot 2-point jumper. The way their defense moves on a string is what allows Wemby to stay in the paint. Notice how Jaden runs through and Wemby takes the matchup. Now when Randall gets to the paint, he's there to turn him away. Only for Shannon to catch and immediately create a new advantage. He runs into Wemby as well. Then Randall does the same again. A quick drive, drawing help from the corner, and this is when most offenses finally create a good look. Harper books it for the corner while everybody else rotates one pass up. And after all of that, they end up with Naz Reid isolating for an off-the-dribble 3-point attempt. Now compare that to the Spurs. Gobert's not in the court, and Wemby spaced to the 3-point line. When they create an advantage going downhill, there's nobody to stop a layup. Without Rudy, the Wolves' defensive game plan looks a lot different. Against pick and roll, they're gonna switch, then get into Wemby's lower body in hopes of not letting him get up for a lob. If only it was that simple. In situations where they're trying to avoid a switch by having Randle drop back, he can't cover both the ball and the roll, and they don't have anybody behind the play who can stop Wemby from scoring at will, which he was definitely aware of. His aggression as a rim runner stood out on every possession. Once he catches the ball within 6 feet, the only way to stop him from scoring is to send him to the line. Again, I want you to think about how that changes when Kornet's out there. Now Gobert's back on the court. He's able to drop back, play both the ball and the roll, and turn those layups or dunks into tougher mid-range jumpers. Then, like I said earlier, on the other side of the ball, he can't cover the entire paint by himself. So when Shannon attacks one-on-one and wins his matchup, Kornet has to help, leaving Rudy alone on the glass. With Wemby out there, these opportunities simply don't exist. Ant wants to attack baseline, but he's standing in front of a driving lane. Then when Ant turns his back to play from the post, he comes with a double. The Spurs rotate out of that, Randle tries to attack Castle one-on-one, and guess who's waiting for him? If you're going up against this team, you better hope you can hit tough shots. And funny enough, the Wolves did enough of that to actually go into halftime with a tie. 51-51, anybody's game. Real quick, I want to take a second to thank PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. If you know you can play responsibly and you have the means to do so, PrizePicks is America's #1 app for sports picks. So if you're looking for a place to get in on the NBA playoffs, use code HMA and get started. A pivotal Game 5 is coming up between the Cavs and the Pistons. Donovan Mitchell has been on a heater, averaging 36 points a game over his last 3. I think he'll continue to get his shots up and score more than 26.5. A big part of that shift has been getting Asar Thompson off the court. His minutes have been replaced by Karis LeVert, who's relied on to be a secondary scorer. He had 24 in Game 4. I like him for 7.5 in Game 5. And it's that easy. Find the stat you want, pick more or less, and you've got your lineup. If you sign up for PrizePicks with code HMA and play $5, you get $50 in lineups instantly. So download the app or click the link in the description to get started, and let me hear your picks down in the comments. The Wolves opened up the second half trying to run everything through Ant, but on the Spurs side, nothing changed, so he'd have to find offense over the top. I actually think this third quarter did a great job of showing how much Ant has grown over the last year. How do you counter an all-time great rim protector? With the floater. This wasn't in his bag before. It not only speaks to the evolution of his skill set, but his ability to problem solve and make in-game adjustments, realizing that the floater is a way to still impose himself in the paint. You could tell that he was actively hunting for this shot, even after drawing a hard double and losing the ball while trying to split it. He wants to get to the floater. Honestly, this felt like a team-wide adjustment. The entire third quarter was littered with floaters. Ant draws a double, gives it up to Ayo, who drives off the catch and floats it up over Wemby in the paint. In theory, a floater is the ultimate counter to Wemby's style of defense. The problem is that it's a much harder shot than it looks. Thanks to Synergy, we actually have the numbers. They define these shots as runners, and this season, only 2 Wolves made over 48% of them. Ayo, Ant, and Randle are all in that 47 to 48% range, while Gobert and Conley have really struggled. We're talking at most 1 point per attempt, and that's on average. Against Wemby, it takes a different type of timing, a different type of arc. Sometimes you think you have access, you don't. So outside of a few tough buckets, the Wolves didn't really have a counter. Regardless of how well they handled double teams, got the ball to the right spots, and forced the Spurs into rotation. Regardless of how well they got to the paint, spaced the floor, and set great screens to create advantages. Everything was covered. Everything was difficult. It was pretty clear that if they wanted to win, it would have to come by shutting down San Antonio's offense. Like I mentioned earlier, whenever Gobert's on the court, he's gonna drop way back against pick and roll. Wemby shot 2 of 15 from 3 over the first 2 games. He finally knocked one down. Just the threat of the jumper though, with the way he moves, allows the Spurs to get extremely creative with how they set up their offense. This time he runs off a flare screen and Rudy chases him over the top, which means Reed has to drop back to play a cut. Just that subtle advantage creates a closeout for Vassell to attack on his way to the rim. A few minutes later, they switched it up. Now he's the one setting a flare screen, only to immediately run off a cross screen going towards the ball, leaving him with space to drive into and draw a foul. His presence alone just creates so many advantages for the offense, even if it's subtle. For example, spacing the floor. Rudy's pulled to the three-point line so he's not able to help, and maybe more importantly, he can't rebound. The Spurs get a second chance, the defense is out of position, and Fox is left with a wide open corner 3. Sometimes the impact is a lot more obvious though. This time he plays the point. Keldon comes to set an inverted ball screen, and he's left with space to attack downhill. Good luck stopping that. To start the fourth, Rudy was back on the bench, which meant Wemby was back to attacking smaller defenders in the paint. The Wolves switch, he establishes deep post position, and that's just way too easy. So they went right back to it a play later. But Randle doesn't want to give up a switch, so Fox walks right into a wide open jumper, which he misses, only for Wemby to grab a second chance and put it back. With Gobert back in the game, the pick and roll looks different. It still poses a challenge though. In order to play both the ball and the lob, a third defender has to come over from the weak side, prompting a skip pass from Castle to a wide open 3 for Champagny. Everything looks different, actually. Here they go back to using him like a wing. He comes off a down screen, only to set a ghost screen up top, and eventually the ball finds him for a perimeter isolation. He starts to get downhill, draws help, and drops it off to Harper for a layup. So, like clockwork, they ran it back. Wemby versus Gobert, one-on-one, in space. But this time nobody comes to help, so he spins into a mid-range jumper. A play later, they went back to that flare screen action from the third. Only Gobert makes the mistake of ducking under instead of chasing him over the top, and he's left with space to step into another triple. 16 points in the fourth quarter. That's what he did on offense. While everything we talked about on defense held up. You've got the constant pressure, the hard double teams, and Wemby waiting underneath the basket while Minnesota tries to win with difficult shots. Needless to say, they didn't. At least, not enough to keep up with what he was doing on the other side of the ball. He single-handedly took this game over on both ends, shifted the entire dynamic of every possession, and willed them to a 2-1 series lead. Now, I don't want to give credit to Wembanyama solely. It's always a team effort, but this is what the pinnacle of impacting a playoff game looks like. He changed quite literally every single facet. As a scorer, he poured in 39 points on about 85% true shooting, dominating the paint, getting to the line, creating his own shots, hitting his threes, playing like a point, a wing, a big. It didn't matter. As an off-ball playmaker, his movement, finishing ability, and shooting threat helped create tons of openings for teammates, especially from 3. What's crazy though is that they actually shot below their average. Outside of Wemby, they made just 9 of their 28 threes, 32%. From the corner, 3 of 11, 27%. Yet still, they produced a 125 offensive rating during his 37 minutes. Imagine if they had a hot shooting night. His impact went so far beyond the offense though. For starters, he completely dominated the glass. 15 rebounds is always good, but he was especially active in the clutch, getting a hand on every loose ball. Most importantly though, this was one of the most impactful defensive performances you will ever see. The Wolves were completely helpless. With Wemby on the court, they only attempted 10 shots at the rim. 10 shots in 37 minutes. Those layups were replaced by tougher mid-range shots, to which they went 8 of 30, or about 27%. They actually shot great from 3. 37% on that diet is pretty impressive. But because they couldn't score inside the arc at all, they only had a 102.6 offensive rating, about 14 points below their typical average. Dominant defense, dominant rebounding, dominant scoring, answers to every question, counters to every adjustment. That's what Victor Wembanyama gave the Spurs in Game 3. He played one of the best individual playoff games ever, and he's 22 years old, in the second round of his first playoff appearance ever.